You're listening to a speech therapy PD podcast. Earn 0.1 ASHA CEUs for this episode by completing the accompanying course online at speechtherapypd.com.
Welcome to School of Speech, the podcast for school-based speech language pathologists who want practical strategies, thoughtful conversations, and evidence-based tools that they can use right away. If you listened to last week's episode on multilingual evaluations, we talked about assessment and converging evidence. Well, today we are building on that foundation and shifting into intervention. I'm joined by Alisha Gandhi, and she's talking about vocabulary development and translanguaging for our multilingual learners. She's going to be helping us SLPs on how we support students' full linguistic repertoires in both therapy rooms and in the classroom. And yes, you can earn 0.1 ASHA CEUs just for tuning in. So let's settle in and get on with the show. Welcome back to School of Speech, presented by Speech Therapy PD. School of Speech is designed for all of us school-based SLPs to come together, to learn boldly, think critically, and really shine the light of all the incredible work that's happening in our schools every single day. I'm your host, Carolyn Dolby, and I am so glad you are here, and so will you. Today's episode is Vocabulary and Translanguaging Strategies for Multilingual Learners. It's not just what to teach, but how to teach in ways that are additive and collaborative. And honestly, this is one of those episodes that's going to make you go, I'm going to rethink how language really works in the schools. So if you've ever found yourself wondering, am I supporting my multilingual students, their full language system? Or are you wondering how to make vocabulary instruction culturally sustaining and academically meaningful? And maybe you're even wondering, how can I make sure what I'm doing in the speech room carries over to the classroom? Well, friends, you're in the right place, let me tell you. I am so excited because I am joined today by Alisha Gandhi, and Alisha brings deep experience from her work as being a bilingual SLP in New York City public schools, early intervention, private practice, where she has provided culturally and linguistic responsive diagnostic and therapeutic services for students with a wide range of communication needs. Currently, she is an associate professor and director of the bilingual extension track of New York University. Alisha, welcome to School of Speech.
Hi, it's so good to be here.
Oh my gosh, we are so lucky, and I can't wait to dive in, but I have a little bit more to go over. So settle in, everyone. I am a salaried employee of Portland Public Schools in Oregon. I'm a co-founder of A Place to Start Therapy, and I do receive compensation from Speech Therapy PD for hosting School of Speech, my dream job. Alisha, she is a salaried employee of New York University and has no relevant non-financial, and neither do I actually. Do you mind starting us off with why is vocabulary such a critical area or a critical focus for our multilingual learners?
Yeah. So, hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you. I am joining you from New York. Yeah. So vocabulary, we all know vocabulary is important. We also know vocabulary is challenging, right? Not just because it's a lot of things to learn, but learning how to learn vocabulary can be really tricky. It can be really tricky for us to teach, and it can be really tricky for our students to learn, with or without language impairments, right? Are going to have difficulty learning vocabulary because it's not easy to learn. You need a lot of repetitions for a word to understand it. And you need it to be salient, right? Across different places, different locations, different settings. You want it to be useful to the student. When vocabulary is useful, it gets used, right? So it's really important that we support it. Also, because as our learners get older, and if we have secondary school folks or secondary level folks here, as you know, as the academic rigor increases, so does the vocabulary. And the vocabulary doesn't just mean, these are some new words we're going to read in a book today, right? It's vocabulary for answering word problems, for answering open-ended questions, for instructions, for writing an essay. So this is all part of the vocabulary. So when you talk about vocabulary, we're not just talking about words around a theme, although those are really nice too. It's about enriching the language system of our learners and supporting them so that they can grow with their language system.
And I'm assuming also like academic language is huge. Are there any misconceptions about vocabulary development? And then I was going to go into something else. So maybe I'll start with that question, actually. Do we have any misconceptions on how vocabulary develops in our multilingual students?
Yeah, there's a few that are out there. Actually, one that, I encountered just this week. So I think one of the biggest myths that I encounter, and a lot of us were taught this myth, is this idea of this silent period where our multilingual learners just stop talking because it's too many languages, right? And that's not any more likely to happen for a multilingual learner than it is for a monolingual learner. Kids are going to be kids. They're going to do what they're going to do for many different reasons and for developing in many different ways. I have a 4.5-year-old. She does things I expect and things that I absolutely do not. So some kids are going to maybe be a little bit more introverted when they first go to school, whether or not the language that's being communicated in is confident for them. But our multilingual learners, they have the same capacity to communicate and use language as all of our learners do, right? They just have more of them. They've got a little bit more, but they can still communicate. They can still communicate just as effectively. When we talk about things like, oh, they're delayed because they're learning a new language, they're not delayed, right? They're learning a new language, and every kid develops at their own rate. There's really not that much of a difference between multilingual learners, taking a step back, or some that might need more time to develop language skills, and monolingual learners. We just don't talk about it in monolingual learners. We talk about, oh, they're growing at their own pace, wait and see, or they do have a language impairment. Whereas with multilingual learners, we look at it from a deficit, like, oh, this multilingual learning is impacting their development, when really they're just developing. So I think that is one of the big misconceptions. And the other misconception I come across often is kind of this idea that multilingual learners, you kind of mentioned academic language, which is super important. And that's important for all of our learners. There's this myth that students who are bilingual, who are learning a new language, and in our case, that's typically English for the first time, that they'll be efficient social communicators in like a couple of years, but it takes a long, long time for them to be competent in academic language. And that's just not true. Again, that's kind of that deficit mindset of that social language. First of all, who says that social language isn't academic, right? And it's really just, it's more words to learn. They're learning it. I don't know any kid that knows all of the academic language when they first start school, right? They just might hear it more all through time. So yeah, a multilingual learner who's being exposed to the language for the first time, these more difficult, more challenging vocabulary words to learn are going to be more difficult and more challenging because that's how vocabulary works. That's not, the fault of their language. And, what we're going to talk about today is really that we can take their language where it is, and that is academic. That does have meaning. It does have power. It does have value. It does have academic value. So we don't need to think about it as they're developing social language and academic language. They are developing language like all of our learners, and they are learning how to use it in a variety of ways.
I love this. Language is language.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying is what I'm hearing, because I specialize in feeding, and food is food is food. So that concept hits well with me. Language is language is language. Which kind of brings me now to, let's talk about what you mean by translanguaging. If we want to look at what is translanguaging and code switching, let's go there. I need some.
Yeah, absolutely. So translanguaging, I think recently I'm sure a lot of you in this room have heard it. It's kind of one of those buzzwords that's being thrown around, which it's it's important, right? Like any sort of vocabulary, like we're going to talk about. The word being used and being useful is important. It helps us all learn what it is. But of course, we want to make sure we're using it correctly and appropriately. So one of the questions I get from fellow SLPs and from my students all the time is, what is the difference between code switching and translanguaging? It just seems like a fancier way of saying code switching, which we already did. To some degree, that may be true. But code switching really emphasizes the boundaries between the two languages. So there's the English language system and the Arabic language system, and then they're going back and forth between the two. Translanguaging sees it all as, like you said, language is language. It's all one system. And we are asking our speakers to use that whole system, that whole spectrum of language that they have as a whole, and we're allowing it and valuing it in all places without even really making it, a huge deal that, oh, they went from this language to that language. They're communicating in their language. So that's kind of the idea behind translanguaging, is honoring those many forms of communication. And I'm sure I'm also, one of my other interests is AAC. I'm in the AAC world. I'm sure a lot of my folks here who work with AAC users, you're saying the same thing. It's just, we're talking about it with multiple modalities, right? That we want our communicators to communicate however they're able to, right? We want them to get the message across. And the same thing with our multilingual learners. We're honoring communication.
So am I hearing what I'm hearing is that translanguaging is really not insisting on one language when we're asking students to communicate with us. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Yeah.
That kind of dumbs it down maybe a little bit.
No, I mean, I think that's that's what it is. I think it's actually, it's funny because it's a fancy word, but I feel like it is common sense. Almost, right, to some degree, like in terms of making it simple, like it should be a simple concept. We're letting communicators communicate.
And I like the way that you connected AAC to this, that multi-modality, being able to use all communication forms, and using any of your language and honoring. I love that when you say honoring that, because then they're not wrong ever. That's really student. It's really looking at I think I just got a good transition for us, because that's looking at the student's full linguistic repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than, and using it as an asset rather than as a barrier. So if we are going to start looking at their full linguistic repertoire as an asset and additive, how is that going to change how we approach maybe instruction entirely? That's a big, I think I just asked a big question.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I can make it a smaller question, or you can just choose what you want to start with on that one.
Maybe I'll start, and then you can give me the follow-up. So there is kind of an additional kind of layer to translanguaging that is that scholars are researching, called pedagogical translanguaging, which is really just pedagogy is teaching. So it's teaching using translanguaging, right? It's the process of teaching. So it's a little bit different than what we talk about with spontaneous translanguaging, because the pedagogical translanguaging is how we plan lessons to incorporate translanguaging and how to value translanguaging within those spaces. So we're really activating our multilingual learners' knowledge that they already have, and then scaffolding new language on top of it, which is, again, what we were doing anyway, right? We're just doing it with a full linguistic repertoire in mind. And the idea there is that it's learner-centered. We're looking at the student, we're looking at what they're already doing across languages, across communication systems, and we are taking that and then saying, okay, this is the word they need, this is the language they need that they don't have, here's how we build from what they do. And it's the same. A lot of these strategies are the things we're already doing. And I think that's, one thing I want to drive home is I know how hard everyone is working and doing, and I don't want to give you extra work to do. And this shouldn't be extra work. I know that working in a school as an SLP is exhausting. You already have enough to worry about. So the goal here is that these are things that really you're already doing. You're just being more intentional about them. And you're doing them in a way that honors multilingual learners in a way that, isn't traditional in a Eurocentric, English-centric education system.
So what I'm hearing is, no, yeah, you're not asking us to do something new, but we are all wanting to do what is right, right?
Yeah.
And I think maybe just sometimes we have to do a mind shift a little bit, but it's not really doing it different. It's not really doing something more. It's just doing something maybe a little differently. Like maybe framing it on how do we choose how do we choose the vocab that we need to teach?
Yeah. So we want to be intentional. I think, in terms of system, there's obviously language, incidental vocabulary learning that's going to happen all the time. But when we are thinking about it in a school and we're thinking, okay, this is a student who is struggling, they're on our caseload, they're struggling with learning vocabulary. They are multilingual, right? They struggle learning vocabulary and they're multilingual. Two things are true. And so we want to support them in learning vocabulary. And we want to ensure that all of what they have is regarded as an asset. So kind of from that perspective, you might want to think about, okay, what words do they already have and what words maybe do they need to know? And this is where we collaborate with our classroom teachers and we think about what is going to be useful, what is going to be helpful. You might work on things like prefix. You might be working on a certain set of words, prefixes, suffixes, multiple meanings, all of those different things that we do. Those are great. We can be intentional about how we're doing them. So we can pick a couple of words that are going to be really, really helpful. What I always suggest is trying to, not that the content words aren't important and we want them to learn it, but when we know that content, those like kind of noun-driven words, they are easier to learn because there's kind of a physical thing, right? That this means this. It's much easier. But all of our learners have a lot more difficulty with those abstract concepts. So I think looking at tier 2 words is really a great place and thinking about them within text and then within other places. So for example, one example I give, especially for, the little guys, is if you're doing a unit on plants in your classroom. So you say, okay, what words do we want them to use? Okay, stem, petal, pollen. Yes, we want them to learn those words. That's part of the unit. Great, but those are more concrete. Now, if we think about a word like sprout, right? It's much more abstract. It's very tied to it, but it's also comes from other things. So now you're talking about the plants sprouting, and hair sprouts, a fountain sprouts, the sprinklers. I don't even know what the word is. Sprinklers sprout.
Yeah.
Right? There's so many different ways for that to be helpful. And that's kind of an example of just like a verb. In other cases, you might want to think about more of those academic words, things like process, significant, indicate. These are all often words that are part of what we're doing already, right? What is the process of a plant growing? And now we kind of talk about process. So thinking about, yes, we have those content words. Very likely they're going to learn them because it's much easier to learn them. It's much easier for all of us to learn them. These more abstract concepts, we want to show them how they can use it in a variety of places. It makes it easier. It makes it more understandable. And then the key there with our multilingual learners is that those words, they exist in all languages, and we want to leverage that repertoire. So we want to maybe think about how are they talking about plants in all of their languages, and then how can we support that? Okay, we're working on sprout. I mean, one thing that I think is easy to do is just creating that multilingual ecology is what a lot of people call it, which is really just kind of shaping your classroom so that multilingualism is a fact rather than an extra thing. So your vocabulary words are in different languages, or there's pictures from different flowers from different places. Or, I think it doesn't have to necessarily be just the word, right? It can be really learner centered. So maybe you have the word sprout or garden, and then maybe you don't have it in every single language in your classroom. That's kind of difficult to do. Maybe you have it in one or two, maybe you don't. But maybe you have pictures of the kids with plants in their garden, right? With their parents, with their family members. So translanguaging doesn't even necessarily have to be about specifically the words. It's about creating an atmosphere of communicative success that is built on the strengths and the community that is already embedded in our learners' lives.
Yeah, I think, being a monolingual SLP, I think we're all those I'm speaking, others would really like to know how we can make sure that we are honoring, because I don't speak another language, but definitely love to learn from the littles and from when they are using a word and honoring that and having them tell us what that is. That just kind of builds that foundation that they're teaching us something. It's kind of what I love.
Don't your kids love telling you when you're wrong? Like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also love the fact that you're asking about, you're really saying, and if we are pulling the student, they are getting, we do want to be doing those, like you said, tier 2 words. And we actually got a question. I don't want to, I'm going to stop. I'm going to ask the question. Nicole, thank you for your question. If a goal has tier 2 vocabulary or grade level vocabulary, I see that one too. Where do you find or choose word targets? Oh, do you have a specific site you recommend or a list that you feel is accurate? That's a hard one, right?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a specific site. I mean, there are all of the sites that I feel like all of us use, like Teachers by Teachers and the reading worksheet site. We use them, I use them, we all do, right? And so I think, those can be a really good starting point. But I would really look at what are really thinking about the words that are being used commonly in the child's classroom, or that they're already maybe using in other ways. So if they are, I'm trying to think of a good example. It's hard to do it off the top of your head.
I know, sorry.
It's so hard. But a word like, I used the word process before, right? So say it's the word process. That is a word that maybe they're reading about in a book. Maybe it's a textbook. Maybe it's a fiction book. It could be in either place. But there's like lots of processes. There's processes all over their life. There's a process of playing basketball. All of these things have a process, right? In Spanish, that we process. So, but a lot of people talk about cognates as a really good leverage. And I do think they can be helpful when it's a language that does have cognates with English. But I also am a little bit hesitant, and I want people to kind of not think about that. A lot of people think of that as like the first entry point of supporting multilingual learners is teaching them cognates, but not every language has cognates with English. And like you said, right, you're a monolingual speech therapist. I speak the languages that I speak. I do not share a language background with every single one of my learners.
Right. Yeah.
It's impossible, right? So we're all working with multilingual learners who speak other languages. So, it's less about, I think it's less about speaking the language and more about being curious, leading with curiosity, knowing that the language is there. And then, you know what, like we're speech language pathologists. It's our job. That's our job, right? Yeah. We have to figure out how our child is communicating and how we can help them communicate better. So that's kind of what you want to think about. And then in terms of kind of those tier 2 words, I always like start with functional. Start with something that's functional that they're going to use, that they're going to be able to use a lot throughout the day. I do think it's great to collaborate with, this is a great place to collaborate with teachers. What are the words that are coming up? What are some of the words they're using? Even just ask for a copy of, a test or a worksheet or something like that, you can go through it and you can be like, okay, these are some words that I think my students are going to need a little bit of extra support with. And that's a good place to start as well.
I think when we're working, like when we're in like the primary or the, the earlier years, when we are teaching on themes, I think, excuse me, we often, that's kind of like an easy one that we can be like, okay, we know what the theme's going to be with this classroom. I think as we get into the upper grades, when it's less themes, that I think that when we're looking at vocabulary, really looking at beyond just, looking at what the novel they're going to be reading in their English class. I always love looking for like, what are they going to be talking about in science? That's always so interesting. Yeah. And even math, right? There's so much vocabulary in math to think about. So I think looking at, depending on what your grade level is looking across the board of what, and maybe looking at maybe what am I trying to say? Like, where are they having trouble the most in, right? So if they're struggling more, if their language is causing, maybe some issues, maybe in math, choose some of those math terms. Like, I like the way you said, make it student-centered. Like, what does the student need? I love that, right? And I think when we're also, how can we, so we want to be teaching the right words. Is there a way we can also support our teachers with vocabulary and being able to, let's rope them in?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's something we of course want to do when we're in a school. So we're really thinking about not just how we're always thinking about that, right? How we can support our students in our little speech bubble, whatever it looks like, an office, a corner, a coat closet, whatever it is, the classroom, whatever you have. Right? We want to teach them there, and then we want them to bring it outside. And I think vocabulary it's something that teachers are very familiar with as well, which I think is nice. It's not one of those language concepts where, we need to explain a lot. Like, they know what vocabulary is as well. So it's really kind of looking at, I think, when you can develop word lists together, that's always great. Look at things together. And a lot of this is, it's stuff that you only have to do like once. And then once you've done it, like, you have your word list, right? You can use it next year as well. And the other thing that I would do is really, again, like you said, like, make it student centered. Take some time either in the classroom with your learners or talking to your teachers. Where are the students struggling? What are things you're seeing them have challenges with? I'm going to also flip this a little bit. Like, there's things they're going to have challenges with, right? They're having trouble with math. We can use math vocabulary. Absolutely. Also, we want to frame it from strengths-based, right? So if they're having trouble in math,
that's what you just said. Sorry.
I said we want it to be strengths-based as well. So they're struggling with math. Maybe some of those math words, we can think about how we can implement them in science because they love science.
Yeah.
Or we start with the science, right? We start with listening to how they're talking about science and then help them translate that into the vocabulary that's new. So, and I don't think there's no one size fits all. It's kind of whatever is going to work for you and your learners. But like we all do, right? Trying to find the best entry point, the best place to support our learners. Sometimes it's, really focusing on what they need. And sometimes it's kind of taking that a little bit of the backdoor approach, right? Where you start with the strength and then you build from there and keep them confident in what they're doing.
I loved that. Being a teacher and the teacher background in me, I came out with let's go straight to the academic. And I love the way that you reframed it. But wait a minute, let's start with their strengths. And and that was something I needed to hear today, is that there is value in having the student using what they already know and build on that. So I love that. So thank you for adding that to me. Adding that to, I don't even know what I was saying. But just sharing that other view, because I took it to the academic and you're saying, well, let's do strength-based. Yeah. Which brings me back to earlier you said social language is language. And I'd like to kind of talk about that because because when you said the misconceptions, like when you said, the silent period, I wanted to go back because it gave me a thought. Like, are you saying there isn't a silent period or we're overusing the silent period?
A little bit of both. I mean,
Okay,
I think it's less we reserve this silent period for a term that we use when we don't think. I think it's used a lot for better or for worse, right? To deny services often more than the other way around,
okay.
as they're not speaking because they're learning multiple languages. So I think from that kind of perspective, right, we want to look at it as, language multilingualism does not cause language delays. We know it doesn't. There's tons and tons of research that tells us that.
Yeah.
That includes a silent period. So I think there's that. I think there's also the idea that because we reserve it as a bad thing that's happening to a child who speaks multiple languages, whereas any child might, in a situation where they're feeling overwhelmed and learning new things, they might step back a little bit. They might get more introverted. They might not say as much in a situation. And I would probably say that our monolingual learners or English speakers in the US who are coming into the classroom speaking the language of the classroom are probably experiencing silent periods as well. We're not paying attention to them, or we're not talking about them. We're saying they're learning.
They're just shy.
They're just shy. They're learning at their own pace. Maybe they do have a language impairment, right? We frame it in a different way, that this is just like part of their growth and development, as opposed to like multilingualism just put a pause on language. And that's not what's happening.
Okay, so I thank you for clearing that up. So I just to restate it is that we should not be saying we should not be going forward with an eval or going forward with supports by saying, oh, they're just having a silent period, because it could be more than that, and we would be doing them a disservice if under identifying. Of course, we don't want to over identify. I mean, it's such a balance, right? Which brings me back to then, so thank you for the silent period, which brings me back to when I was thinking about the social language is, how are kids communicating? Because kids don't always need language to communicate, to play. Right? Yeah.
Kids are notorious for not using language, for just playing, which, I mean, I think for that in itself, that's like one thing to kind of look at and think about, like, how are they so a lot of people use, or not a lot of people, but it's becoming more common. And one of my mentors, who I believe has spoken with you, Dr. Maria Rosa Brea, in the past.
She's a bestie.
Yeah. So she uses language as a verb.
I love that language.
And other people do that as well. And so I also want you to think about the fact that play, maybe it's not oral language, maybe it's not written language, they're still languaging, right? There's still language that is embedded in their communication and their interactions with each other. And that actually is where, to go back to pedagogical translanguaging, you can kind of start. So there is this idea, and I would definitely recommend looking it up. There's like a really nice article that kind of sets it out. The Translanguaging Pedagogies Continuum. So this idea of how we are implementing translanguaging, right? We're doing it in different ways. And the start is listening. So the way they talk about it is they talk about it as a corriente. Corriente is current in Spanish. So they talk about how language is flowing, right? Flowing and moving. And so how are we responding to this corriente, to this current, to help our multilingual learners? And we start by listening. We start by seeing what cultural linguistic knowledge they're bringing to their play, to their stories, to their conversations with their peers, where we know that they're already doing it. Whether or not we're having them do it, they're doing it. They're supporting each other in learning language. And they don't even need to speak the same quote unquote named language to do that. Yeah. They're finding ways to communicate with that, right? So when students are socialized in really monolingual practices, like we speak English, this is what we're doing, they're going to refrain from their translanguaging practices. If we encourage them and really listen to what they're saying and then allow them to say it, don't ask them to change it, don't ask them to switch it or to translate it, right? We're seeing how they're using their communicative resources. And like I said, these are all things we're already doing. Like if you just think about like the Hannon, observe, wait, listen, right? The EI thing, you're already doing it, right? These are all things you're already doing. It's just kind of from a different perspective. And then from there, you can really move into what it's Osapara and Proctor. They call it channeling the corriente. So now we're kind of adding in the current. And so this is kind of where we make sure we're accepting contributions in multiple languages and that we are using multiple languages to differentiate instruction, to scaffold, to reinforce, to model translanguaging ourselves, in however we do it, right? Help develop those connections. And then we can really move into what's called flowing with the corriente, which is not just kind of listening or accepting, it's infusing that translanguaging kind of system. So all that vocabulary that you're thinking about, how are you infusing it in multiple ways, in multiple languages, in multiple languaging capacities, so that their voices and their realities, essentially our students' realities, are centered and built upon, and they become co-learners or teachers in that way as well.
I love that. I love the idea of current because it's ever flowing and I love that. I love when things can paint a word picture for me. And so I want to make sure that I have the continuum. You said starts with listening.
Mm-hmm.
And then was the next one seeing, or was that part of listening?
Kind of, it's channeling the corriente. So that's like, it's going and you're with it.
Okay.
So you're just kind of watching it and then like, okay, like I'm here, I'm in it. And then it's okay, how can I help this to even flow more smoothly?
Okay. How would we if I'm wanting to start, how could I do that? Let's start, I'm loving the thought of current. By listening, what would we be doing there?
So this is just kind of a place where you are really allowing kind of that student-led conversation communication, listening to how they're already discussing things. I think actually literacy is a really great way, is a great kind of way to start, because one, there's a lot of books that use multiple cultures and languages. And, I think our teaching is so much better and richer, and our students are so much luckier that there is so much more literature that kind of reflects those mirrors and those windows that we want students to see themselves with and see others with than there certainly was when I was growing up. And I think that's amazing. And that's, I think, a great place to start, right? Reading a book, let them talk about the book, see what they notice in the book, what's popping out to them, how are they talking about it, how are they labeling it, encouraging that, and again, for our multilingual learners, not, necessarily saying, making them say it in English. They can even just point, and that's okay. Even if they're uncomfortable, maybe using their language other than English in the classroom, because they get it. They feel the stigma, right? Really early on, you can honor their languaging in other ways. And that's a great place also for your preparation. You can think about, okay, what are some of the different vocabulary words in this book that I'm going to be thinking about? And then maybe what languages are in the classroom that I can support with it, right? You don't have to know it. We have Google Translate in our pockets. Mm-hmm. It's not so that's the other thing, right? We don't need to go very far to learn more. It's right there in front of us. A kid says a word and we're not sure what it is, but we know they speak Mandarin at home. You can literally put the phone up to have them say the word, then you know what they're saying, and you can be like, oh yeah, that's right.
So I'm jumping a little bit off because you're saying the listening this continuum is for us.
Yeah, it's what we're doing. I can do that over.
Light bulb just came on. So the continuous for us, this is not what we're moving them through. So the current is us. So the first step for us in really understanding pedagogical, I already said I wasn't going to say that word earlier before we even got started, people. I was like, Alisha, I'm not saying that word. And there's a few words that are hard for me. Translanguaging for us is the first thing that we need to do on the continuum is just to listen and accept all of their communicative intents and nonverbal, the gestures, KK, thank you, physical manipulation, especially with games and things. I think that's when that came in. But that is absolutely true. Like, how else are they communicating and honoring that? And then when they're using a word and being comfortable in using any of words that they want to use. And then, of course, I like the idea of like, let's do that translation and see what word they used.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you.
Yes, that does kind of interrupt this kind of smooth, big, continuum of translanguaging, one idiolect that really does move more to the named languages. And I know some people kind of struggle with that, but we also have a system that we're working in and we're living in and that we've all been socialized in. And so we can do our best to shift our mindset and we can use the tools that we have to make that possible, even if that's not the way our current systems are set up or work. We can do that, right? We can take these systems that value multiple language systems and named languages and things like that. We can turn that into translanguaging. That's where we can come in and do our best to acknowledge that, okay, I'm using something that emphasizes multiple systems, but I'm going to reframe it. I'm going to make sure that my students don't feel that they know that this is all part of their languaging.
That everything is value.
Yeah.
Value added, which brings to channeling by adding, right? Did I do that?
Exactly. Channeling by adding, by thinking about taking what they're already doing and then using that to build.
Mm-hmm. So then we got listening, then we go channeling where we're adding to what they know, adding to what they're interested in, looking, and that's really strengths-based.
Mm-hmm.
Really adding to what is important to them, student-centered, strength-based. What do they already know? How do we add to it? So I'm loving that. So channeling the translanguaging, let's channel it. And then flowing. Can you expand on that one a little bit?
Yeah. So flowing is when we are, I think channeling, is easier to conceptualize. Flowing is where we are designing what we're doing to support translanguaging. So that means that we're encouraging students to tell stories that center multiple languages and multiple cultures and multiple ways of knowing. So we're talking about their personal experiences, maybe our personal experiences, right? We can all do that. We're making sure there are multiple modes of representation. So I think this is another thing, someone mentioned nonverbal and gestures, right?
Yeah.
Oral speech is not the only way we can communicate in a classroom. Oral speech and writing are the typical ways we communicate, but there's other ways, right? There's music, there's dance, there's painting, there's lots of things we can do. And all of those are literacy, right? So part of this is also kind of showing learners that there's not just one way to read. There's not just one way to language. They can language with oral speech in lots of different languages, and they can also do it in ways that make sense. And a lot of those literacy forms, right, that we don't traditionally see as literacy because they're not books, those are what are valued as literacy in people's homes or cultures. So we are, once again, we're elevating that. Not that, okay, you tell stories at home, but here we read. It's we can read and we can tell stories. It's all here.
And I want to just talk about the arts a little bit. I know that might not have been one of the questions, but it just came into me about how art is such part of cultures, and that would be another way to, and honor translanguaging is through art.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having art having art that represents different cultures, that represents different places is really important. Having students bring in art, create art, whatever that looks like. I think art is always
Music.
art,
Music.
music are always, we love using them because they're such great ways of supporting learning and supporting vocabulary development and then supporting strengths, because there's so many different ways that we can language and so many ways we can honor language. And those also bring artifacts into the room when we're talking about kind of flowing. When you have more of these artifacts that represent our students' different ways of knowing and values them, then we are, without even, doing anything more, we are there then flowing, right? We are taking what they have and making that centered so that they can communicate, they can language about it in the ways that are powerful to them, and we can acknowledge the power that's in it.
I love that. That would it's almost a sneaky way, right? Like if they come in and they see something that's very familiar to them, how would you not want to start communicating?
Yeah.
Like, what? I love that.
And I also want to, I said, I want to recognize, these are things that you're already doing in a lot of ways, right? I mean, we have all, do we all know the PJ Masks characters, right? we do this already. We do this all the time. And so this is stepping out of, I think, a zone of comfort. Yeah, I can watch kids and TV shows. It's forcing us to look a little deeper, look a little harder, look at things that we might not traditionally think of as literacy in part of our kids' lives. But it allows us to learn more. It allows our students to teach us more. And so it brings that extra element of that work we're already doing. It might be a little harder and it might be a little more uncomfortable, right? It might be more, I think that's one of probably the biggest challenges with all of this is it doesn't always feel comfortable because it's not as easy. You might feel like, I don't know this language. I don't know this culture. I finding art from this culture. I can't do it, or I can't pick us up.
I think we want to make sure that we are remaining culturally sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're talking about being linguistically responsive, absolutely, but also culturally sensitive to make sure that we are truly honoring,
Yeah.
valuing. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not always easy, and it's not always perfect. And you also have to be okay, I think, from that regard that you might make mistakes. And we don't like making mistakes. We're SLPs. No. We don't like making mistakes. No, but we do. We can acknowledge ways in which we've messed up, or whether it's small or big, and we can learn from them. These are, again, great ways of honoring language. So I'll just tell you an example that always sticks out with me from my life, from my life. When I was in social studies in school. So I am from a South Asian family. My parents immigrated from India, and we grew up, we practiced Islam at home. So we're Muslim. And so in this 6th grade social studies class, we're learning about all these different words and religions. And we have the standard textbook that everyone has. And there's a chapter on this and a chapter on that. And in the chapter of Islam, it talked about the 5 pillars of Islam. And I don't even remember exactly what it said. But what I do remember is I was like, that's not right. That's incorrect.
Oh. Wow.
I think 4 of them were correct. And one of them was I was like, no, that's not it. That's not what the 5th one is. It's the other. And that really being shut down, right? As well, this is what the book says. And I was like, it's not it. It's not right. And so this is, I think, where we want to think of, okay, we might bring something in that, and then our students are like, that doesn't have, I've never seen that. I don't want to look at that. That has nothing to do with me. Then, okay, fine. Let's find something else. Help me to find something else. It's really not that hard to repair those harms if you are authentic in doing it.
Right. If the response was rather than the response you got of, well, that's what it says in the book. What a teachable moment to say, oh my goodness, Tell me what the fifth one is.
Yeah.
How easy is that? Right? And possibly helping you with maybe scaffolding on some of the language that you might need to help tell that. But that's powerful. I wish that had happened for you. Sorry.
I do too. But it's, it's a story and it's an experience. And so again, something to learn from and think about. And I think kind of to bring it back to the vocabulary and the translanguaging, I am kind of that idea of we want to intentionally do things, but we may not always be correct, right? We talk a lot about how, we can do research and we can look at different things. We can do our work and we can do our research and we can, again, leading with curiosity, we can do what we can. And then we can be wrong. We can acknowledge being wrong. When we acknowledge, our own language systems and its strengths and limitations, that also helps our students do the same. So we can bring that, we can build that, we can think about words that have meaning or words that don't, and allow our learners to be part of building that process for us within the classroom.
I love that lean with curiosity. Or is that, I love just
lead with curiosity or lean. That would work too, I think.
I know. I don't know where I was like, I want to lean in with some curiosity. That's what I think that's where I went. I was like, I do want to lean in with some curiosity. And I think that's, and because we want our students to be curious. And so I think it is okay. Let's all be curious and learn something new. Anyway, I think I did better now. I think I've got the better link. Here we go. There we go. Sorry, y'all. Sorry. And then I got you off, Alisha. And then I got off. Okay, let's get back on track. Oh, you're welcome, everyone. And thank you, KK, because you're helping. Thank you so much. All right. I know that we're getting towards the end. Again, like I said, Alisha, I'm always so shocked when we get to the end. I'm like, I'm not quite ready. I'm not quite ready. I want to make sure that we did indeed get through everything that you wanted to share with us. I think.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate if there's any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you for being part of this community of learners with us. Thank you, everyone here, for being in community with us. It's an honor to be able to share this space with you all.
I love this, and I love the group. I love the listeners that come because everyone's willing. We are a hive. We are all sharing together. And let me just do this. But before you go, I'm just thinking leading with curiosity. I'm going to lean with curiosity, but we're all going to lead with curiosity.
Lean in, whatever.
Right. And I just want that our listeners to know we're not asking you to do one more thing, just that shift in mindset on really honoring translanguaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What is something that we can do that you would want us to think about? Okay, tomorrow, what would you like us to start thinking and doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So tomorrow, I would say start with listening. Start with that listening piece. Listen to what your students are talking about. Listen to the ways they're talking about them. If you do have multilingual learners, think about how you can create an environment that affirms them without them having to kind of ask for it, right? Whether that's displaying different languages, displaying different books and cultures, asking them to share. I think, you can do, if you're doing a cooking activity, it's so easy, right? Like, oh, tell me how you make this. Tell me, have them be a part of it. Have families send in recipes. All of these things are part of affirming culture. And the more you do that, kind of from the get-go, it becomes much easier to kind of think about all of these translanguaging things we're talking about. Then you're just doing speech therapy. I love that. All my languages are welcome here.
Thank you, Lauren. I love that.
Great. That's beautiful, right? Just kind of starting there. And the other thing, and this is the more uncomfortable thing, and I'm certainly guilty of not being able to do it all the time as well. Also trying to, as much as you can, model that maybe for your students and for your colleagues as well, right? Because I think that's the other thing. I always feel like when I'm having these types of discussions, I'm speaking to the people who want to do this and who already kind of know this. And it's kind of the people who aren't here that really need to kind of make these reframes. And we can't, we're not all going to change the world in a day, but maybe modeling it in any way you can can be really powerful.
What I see is when we are modeling how we are honoring the language and incorporating their language. And I think that's what's powerful for those that might be, digging in their heels on, and so I think modeling, but I love that. So we are going to tomorrow, Lauren, we're going to do what you're doing. I think Lauren's suggestion of making a sign on her wall that says, all my languages are welcome here, or all languages are welcome here. Right there. Like just seeing that. Talk about a sense of community and a sense of belonging. That's beautiful. And KK saying, thank you for the specific activities. Yeah, absolutely. And the rationale behind it. That's what really helps us. And Alisha, thank you. Really, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your expertise today. Teaching vocabulary isn't just about words. I think we learned that today. It's really about honoring whole language systems. I think that's my walk away today is really, well, first I'm going to listen, lean, and lead with curiosity. Sorry, I'm never going to laugh at myself. But I think everybody here, I think they're leaving with some wonderful knowledge, and thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks everyone for everything that you do every single day. I know this is hard. Our jobs are so hard, but I think this really, we deserve having these really thoughtful conversations like we had today. And so I really thank you, Alisha, for coming and sharing this time with us. I thank everybody that was here and open. Yeah, and thank you for sharing your personal experiences. I think that's really powerful. We see the tie-in for you, and we can bring some tie-ins for ourselves. So everyone, I want to thank you. If you love this episode as much as I did, I love all our episodes, subscribe, leave a review, share with your fellow SLPs that this is a wonderful podcast, that we really share everything. We have great, sometimes nerdy conversations, and some really powerful like this one. I feel like this is a really personal, and I feel honored that you were here to share that with us. All right, guys. Bye. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thanks for joining us on today's podcast. Remember to go to speechtherapypd.com to learn more about earning ASHA CEUs. We appreciate your positive reviews and support, and would love for you to write a quick review and subscribe.
Remember to visit speechtherapypd.com to earn 0.1 ASHA CEUs for this episode, and to see our library of over 1,400 courses for all things SLP.